Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reflections on Music and Nature. I'm really happy here to have with me Omari Tau, who is a baritone and co-founding and artistic director of Rogue Music Project, which is a Sacramento-based media project which kind of resists genre and classification. He's a Sacramento native and has worked in a tremendous variety of roles, including as a singer, an actor, director of musical theater and opera, composer, professor, and in genres ranging from classical music to jazz to pop, and probably other things I am not even mentioning here. Uh, so, how have you been these days, and what is your creative self doing right now? Are you doing a lot of creative things, or are you kind of not avoiding that?
Well, because I am getting ready for school, I've got that on the plate. Getting ready for that it's really more about getting in the right headspace for it and just sort of committing, getting to the schedule. You know, the world is so upside down that it's my schedule and my ability to focus it's all over the place. But I am being creative. I have to be creative. There are a couple of projects that came into my lap. And things like this really just sort of a lot of conversation really gets me going. Because without it, I can fade. So good conversations with friends and artists and like minds and things like that sort of gets me going. So I have a lot of creative projects, not exactly about composition necessarily, but some about direction, some about uh, music education. I've got a lot of really cool initiatives that I want to get going because I've got the connection with the college and there's a high school across the street and all kinds of things like that. So the juices are flowing now with that.
That's good. I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that. You mentioned all of these different creative activities that are maybe not necessarily what we conventionally think of as creativity, but like
Mhm.
projects and teaching is absolutely a creative act. And that's one of the things that I like so much about you, and I always have admired about you, is that you're so talented and knowledgeable in not just in just like lots of different stuff. Like I didn't even know you sent me this opera, that we'll listen to a little bit of, and I didn't even know that you did that actually. Um, on top of that, you're a director, you're all these different things that I named, and in the various productions that I've seen of yours, over the years, that's something that I kind of notice, and I think comes out like I always find you have an interesting angle and interesting perspective when I talk to you and when I look at the art that you're doing. Um, and I feel like I sense that a lot of that has to do with your different activities in those different areas. So I wonder, like, if you could talk a little bit about your ideas about creativity and what kind of influence your different creative projects have on each other. That's really interesting to me.
You know, I don't know. A lot of that has to do with making what you can when you can. I don't know. I have this weird duality of feeling very young and also feeling like over it old. Like, like to, what I mean by that is I go with the flow. I go with what's coming next. And throughout our lives, as artists, as students, we are constantly being told to do a thing, plan for your future, focus here, do that. And for many of us, that's not an option. Like we're not fulfilled that way. Maybe it's because we're not great at one thing. Maybe it's because we're not, we don't see ourselves as extremely successful there and it leads us there. And without that very clear delineated path of you're going to be a sports person or you're going to be a business person or you're going to be a performing artist, often I think, and for me, I was a very average student, but I felt like that was not, that would mean that I would not be of value in any given place. And I knew that I had interests in so many different areas. I didn't know that I had any talent for music until someone said, "Hey, join this class," And I went for it, and that's continued to happen. You know, you want to write a song? Sure, I'll try to write a song. And now I'm taking composition classes. You know, have you ever written anything this big? You know, I did another talk a week or so ago about sort of the opportunities and about taking them as they sort of arrive. I wouldn't say it was fearless. I think I would say I was just kind of like just open. You know, they say luck favors the prepared or whatever, something like that. I think that's the notion. I think that for me, it wasn't necessarily about being prepared, it was being willing. So I see this idea of being in, the story I shared last time was being in this room full of doors. Another friend of mine used this image and I stole it from him. Being in this room full of doors, and each door is an opportunity, and you go through that door and you in another room, and there are more doors and there are more opportunities, and you can just choose and go, right? I was told, like everyone else, you know, jack of all trades, master of none, and that may very well be true. I give up that idea. I don't need to be a master of anything. No one has to be. We have to live our lives and have a great time doing it. Burn the cake. Oops. So what? It's not the end of the world. You know, I write music. It's not all the greatest. You know, not everything that we write is going down in the annals of history, but it does truthfully and honestly reflect who we are at any given moment. And so I just made an agreement with myself. I was just going to go for it. I was going to try it. Sure. And enjoy each of those moments until I don't anymore. If I don't like doing it, put it away, you know, move on to the next thing. That's okay. And I think that that's why I've been so interested and excited about trying new things. And then someday you're 40 something like myself, and then you go, well, I guess they're looking to me now for decision making. So I you know, now I have to provide opportunities, or at least coax people into to trying things out for themselves too. So I hope that answers your question. I think it's what drives me for all these different areas is not because I'm not one of those. There are some of the people who are really, really, really savant, like smart, super smart. I'm not that guy who like reads 10 books a week and then, you know, comes out and I can't remember anything. So that's not me. I'm just willing to go.
You know, I think that's actually really good. That's good career advice. And it's also good advice for just someone to have a happy life at the same time too.
There you go.
Very healthy. You know, just not having this idea of like, oh, I have to master this one thing only, which like, that's fine. Some people, you know, do great with that. But, you know, doing all these different things and just being open-minded. This is something I try to tell, like, you know, my own students too. Like, don't ever think like, oh, I don't do this or I don't do this. I can't do that. Just go for it. So I think
there's a lot of our industry in the classical music world where mastery is so important, you know, about skill development and things like that. And that's very, very true. I mean, when you think about the sort of, what do you call it, sort of the music mill that sort of sucks in students and crafts, moves them and moves them around and what do you call it, shapes them and then pushes them back out. We're not always pushing back out artists who have lived any lives, right? How are you an artist and you haven't tried anything? You can't play that part or understand that melody or what this composer was thinking if you haven't even
been, you know, have life experiences and, you know, done other things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I just say go for it.
That's good. So this series is kind of centering around music and nature, which, you know, I feel like I'm very interested in a very broad sense of what that means. And so people who have been on here have talked about a lot of different angles. And I think it's also true, like, even for someone who may not say, oh, like, I don't really deal necessarily with nature directly, like, they probably have without realizing it, or confronted it in some way in something that they've done. And then there's also a broad idea, like the idea of nature is related to like your surroundings and community and all of those things. Mm-hmm. And I know for sure you've done a lot of community engaged stuff as well. So how does the idea of the natural world or the environment or one's surroundings, how does that impact your creative work and your ideas about music in general?
It's such an interesting question because I've never really focused in on that concept. I mean, not exactly when I think of nature, when I think of natural world, I've never really considered that and how that affects me. However, I know in terms of me and focus that I need open space. I need clear space. I need some sort of amount of serenity um, to get to the creative place for me. But the relationship between my space, um, the smell of the air, water is so important to me. Having that as um, something to connect with gets me in the mind of art, creativity, focus, I guess I should say. I've been, because of the COVID thing, I've been able to make my schedule. And so in the mornings, I go for a walk to the park and I read my book while I'm there. And just the breeze, the air sort of helps me focus and get ready for whatever the rest of the day has to offer. And that's never been the case. I'm a city boy. I'm like nature schmature. I'm like, I like a street lamp on every corner.
And busy, crowded streets with lots of people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. Oddly, I'm not even in. I like the idea of seeing all of that, not being in it, but seeing it. Yeah.
Pre-COVID.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I certainly sort of see how setting is crucial for creation.
Right, especially in theater type of works, where sometimes nature can be, or the nature of the environment can be a kind of character.
Yes,
In and of itself.
absolutely. I think that's kind of it. It really is. It is a character that you have to interact with day in and day out. The space is a character. The created space in theater and opera, of course, is something that you interact with. That's why those designers are so important, because they can help make or break the world. You know, they're literally creating that world. Is it a dark, scary place, or is it a bright and happy one? Or in between, and where it gets really interesting. So, yeah, I haven't considered it as a topic specifically, but I like the nature. I like the idea of that.
Like I said, I think it's unavoidable, and I think you probably do it without knowing it. You mentioned like maybe you enjoy being in a like kind of a crowded city in terms of being inspired, because some people do the opposite. Some artists, they like to go on retreats where there's nobody there and it's just fields.
I can't. I'm not one of those people who can sleep to music, or I'm not one of those people who can work in complete and total silence. Stillness around me in terms of the stuff is one thing, but I don't think I'm a retreat kind of person. I'm the guy who goes to the cafe and I can do work there. But if I'm at home, then I go, oh, I really should fix that thing over there. Or, oh, the sound of that water dripping, or the, oh goodness, you know, it ends up being, it ends up being a greater distraction. So it's a very strange thing. Yeah, I'm not a retreat quiet kind of person. I guess that's that city boy thing too.
Speaking of theater stuff, maybe we can talk a little bit about the opera that you did, Night at the Algonquin.
Algonquin, yes.
So that's a one-act opera that you wrote, just under an hour, and it was produced by the Lone Star Lyric Opera. That sounds like it's in Texas.
That is correct. Yes, it is in Texas.
And it takes place in a hotel where you have a jazz combo as the orchestra.
Yeah.
Could you describe that opera and the plot a little bit, and the setting and the music, how those things interact?
Sure, I'll do my best. A Night at the Algonquin is an opera that sort of chronicles a story or a little time in the writer, poet, critic, Dorothy Parker's life. So Dorothy Parker was a very famous writer. People will know her witticisms and very interesting character. There was a film about her and this same kind of subject called Dorothy Parker and the Vicious Circle. Wonderful film about her life. part of this group of friends that would meet at the hotel and have lunch, and they would talk, and they would all just sort of exchange, you know, these ideas, these quotes, these thoughts, these funky little things that they would do. But of course, they also had their lives, and they were troubled. And so really the opera is, we meet Dorothy, well, actually, Edna Farber, who is one of the writers and a member of the group, tells a story in real life, actually, that they'd gone to the table for a long time, and after a while, you know, they were all writers, and they would come and go, and people moved to LA or moved here and there, and but the table became very famous, and people knew that if they went there, they might see some of these stars, these star writers, etc. And so Edna Farber goes to the table one day, and she sits down at her regular round table where she's expected to see her friends, and it's tourists there. In fact, people are sitting at the table who are just there to maybe interact with some stars, and oh my gosh, the time that they had been there has already faded away. So I took that morsel and sort of said, well, what happens? What does she remember? And so she begins to regale sort of a small tale about who did come to that table and how amazing it was. And so we just sort of go through Dorothy Parker, who she was in love with, her husband, and it was not a great relationship, but she was in love with another writer, etc. And throughout the piece, we weave in some of her poetry, and sort of get this bittersweet moment when she falls for a friend, but their love is not requited, or is not fulfilled, I guess we should say. And then she moves away to Hollywood, away from New York and away from her loves, and we have a little bittersweet ending. It all has a little bit of a jazz background, jazzy combo, but not exactly jazz opera. It's not it, but it's got some of the jazz elements.
There's some jazz sounds in there, but it's
not jazz.
Not really jazz, yeah. So what inspired you to tackle that subject in opera and have that setting?
Well, Kelly Estes, who is the director of that company, Lone Star Lyric, is a friend of mine. We went to college together. We did our master's together at University of Houston, and she is a big fan of great fun writers and really interesting, witty, hilarious, funny writers, and we just got to talking about different ideas, what kinds of characters we'd like to see on stage. She's actually commissioned me before for another piece several years before that, and so we just got to talking over the years about what she might do. She's, you know, a lover of new works, smaller works generally, but she creates, you know, this wonderful platform for composers and artists to come up with new things. And so I thought, oh my gosh, Dorothy Parker, what it'd be great. It'd be great to hear some of her zingers coming out, the sort of stinging, witty remarks that she would have, and her friends as well, to one another. Those would be really great to have sung, I thought.
Yeah, and I think this format of like these short operas, you know, these new short operas, that's really, I mean, I've been, you know, in recent years myself, like diving into this world a little bit and listening to like new operas and watching these performances. And it's really different from what most people think opera is, you know. It's much more, it's often with this chamber instrumentation and shorter pieces, and but very, I don't know, I'm excited to see more of it, and I'm excited that people are doing it. I think it's what we need, especially now.
Yeah.
Given the state of the
world. What are you going to do?
I
mean, we all can't afford to do these giant pieces. I don't know that the audiences are there for it anymore anyway. It's a lot of, I mean, bigger cities, interesting communities around the world are doing this. You know, they're creating these smaller events, these smaller operas or opera style pieces. And it's a great exercise for writers, composers, teams to put together, you know, ideas. And it also kind of reminds us, I mean, we have this fantasy about what big opera is and where it comes from, how it came to be, and that it was always big and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't always that way. Things got big, and and they stayed big for the most part. But really, we start getting back to the earliest parts of it. We get into smaller rooms. We get into more intimate creations, and that's exciting.
Yeah. Could you set up the scene that we have here? It's like maybe about 20 minutes into the entire opera. And
so I think what we're going to see here is the duet between Robert Benchley and Dorothy Parker. And Dorothy has just quit her job at Vanity Fair magazine, where they all worked together. She had a run-in with the boss, and she quit. And of course, she needs a job. So Robert Benchley, her dear friend, says, hey, let's go into business together. We'll just get a little room somewhere in the city, and we'll write freelance. And so they decide to do that. And of course, they're in this very tiny room, and they have this very little bit of what do we call it?
Tension.
Tension, yes. So let's say tension, yes. A little tension between them. And yeah, that's good enough, I think.
So what's it like for you to watch that again after all this time?
I'm like, oh gosh, I can't hear this, can't see her, no one knows what they're taking. What the heck? Oh gosh, where's the camera? No, I in general, I'm so grateful that they give me a chance to just try some things out, and such fine singers were like willing to try this stuff out. Yeah, I feel pretty lucky.
Do you think there's anything about like your own experience as a singer yourself, and as someone who has kind of had different hats on, that has had an effect on the way that you would compose an opera? That's
Yeah, I think the main thing that I try to bring in when I when I write, I swear to you, this may seem silly, but the main thing that I try to put in my composition is to try to find a place where singers feel like they have enough stamina to survive the work. That's, I mean, pretty lines is nice and everything, but can you get through it? How taxing is it? And I thought this was pretty taxing, the piece in general, for the Dorothy Parker. Allison Green, the soprano there, was saying the Dorothy Parker part. But she was like, oh, I like where it sits. I like it. I was like, well, it's kind of hard to understand some of the words. I'm probably going to have to rewrite some of this and that. But she really liked it where it was. So at any rate, I think that being a performer, I'm trying to think about those balances. Yeah, that's a big thing. It doesn't matter if it's cleverly or expertly written if it can't be done and people who are doing it aren't enjoying it.
Yeah, that's really true. That's something that I'm learning as I have more experience. You can write something and on paper it's like, oh yes, this is going to be so. But if what people hear is what happens, and so and that's something that's something I'm learning. So
yeah. So much of the art is in. I say this to all my students and to the people that I'm working with. The art is the process, right? So much more of the art is the process of your composition, what you're writing, how you're putting it together, how you came about it, and then the process of putting it on its feet and all that kind of stuff. Learning it, all the people coming together. That's the art right there, right? The final performance in front of the audience, it's hanging in the gallery. It's kind of done by then, right? We have a wonderful time with the performance, but everything that led up to that moment is really the thing that lives with us. I don't say, we did your opera earlier this year, Bones of Girls, and had a really wonderful time in the process.
Me too.
Right? It was daunting at first. I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to make this happen? Oh my gosh. And then we got into the process and we started talking about it and rehearsing it. And this is going to be fantastic, or this is fantastic. It feels it feels good doing it. And then the performance came, and there was all kinds of nerves and weirdness, and it's this thing. But that was after our process. We'd already committed to the thing, and so so whatever I'm putting together, I'm hoping that the performers, the singers, are enjoying the journey, the work that goes into it.
And I think that's a good reason to work with people that you like.
Oh, yes.
To work with people who you trust and you may, I mean, as well as anybody, just because someone is a talented musician doesn't mean that you necessarily want to work with them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so funny, and the reverse is true. It's so funny. I was just thinking about this the other day. A friend of mine hit me up on Facebook. I hadn't seen since college, and she went to Rice University, and I was at University of Houston. Sort of rival colleges for opera, or whatever. But we were good friends, and I had not heard her sing yet. And we were such good buddies, and so when it was time to hear her sing, I was I was so scared that I thought, we have such a good time that we did this backwards. And so when she did sing and she sang well, I was thinking, thank God you're so good. Thank God you're good at what you do, because I love being around, and it would be weird to be like, I like you, but I don't know if I want to work with you. And then right. So that's, Rogue Music Project kind of came about from sort of this weird combination of us knowing each other, having a good time, but respecting each other already. We respected one another apart from working together. And so when we had so much fun being together and hanging out, we thought, let's try putting stuff together. And so it's a wonderful marriage of that sort of really enjoying working with people. Having your team, your creative team that you want to work with over and over again. We're friends, we're buddies, we're hanging out, and there's going to be some great art in the process too.
And people can feel that. People can feel the good energy and the authenticity of it, I think, as well. It's that was such a great experience working with you guys. Like you're such nice people, and you're just amazing musicians. So it's nice when it's both of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take away any of the toughness. It doesn't take away from the hard decisions. It doesn't take away any of that stuff. It just means that when someone does do someone, they say like, no, we need to cut that, or that doesn't work, or change that it's because we respect you, and because we want to it's not out of ego or anything weird like that. So it goes back to that kind of earlier conversation about me kind of just going with the flow and doing things. I don't go where I don't have to go. I'm working with people I want to work with.
It's like, why? Life is too short,
I'm halfway through it already, and I can't believe it, but I am. And it's like, well, yeah, I'm not. Why would I waste my time?
Especially when the performance is such a small, in terms of time, it's a small amount of time. So might as well have a process. Like, of course, the process is difficult, and it has its moments of pain, like any kind of art, but
any kind of relationship,
Yeah.
Any kind. If you're lucky, your friendships will not always be about high fives and smiley faces. You're going to go through some stuff, and then you're going to be so much more wonderful about how things work themselves out when you reach that understanding.
Yeah, I totally agree. Maybe we could talk a little bit about another project that you did called Convergence, which I got to see part of. That was a three-part series, again, that really captures this idea of defying genre, because it was a multimedia production in 3 parts centering around the history of Oak Park, which is a neighborhood in Sacramento. Yeah. And did you grow up in Oak Park? I know you're from Sacramento.
Not exactly, no. I didn't grow up in Oak Park. I grew up in another part of town, but I did live in Oak Park for a little bit when I was in 4th grade with my uncle, who had a house right there around the corner from one of our events that we had. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm got a connection to the neighborhood, but I didn't grow up there.
Right. So maybe you could describe Oak Park as a place, since you know a lot about it now. And what inspired you? Yeah, maybe describe the neighborhood and I mean, as best you can, and what inspired you to take on this kind of project?
Yeah, I'm no historian by any means, but which is why we hired historians to help speak and talk about it. But Oak Park was the first suburb of Sacramento. It was the first kind of neighborhood just outside of town, and it's just south of the capital. For those of you who are not in Sacramento, it's just south of the city, and it was the turn of the last century was really um, known for its gorgeous oaks. It was acres and acres of oak trees and really beautiful. And before it had been sort of turned into a neighborhood, it was just gorgeous trees and things. And then it became a neighborhood, but they also had all this land. There was that's where the first state fair was at first when they had, is that right, state fair? They had it there first before it moved to another part of town. There was a little train that used to go through. PG&E put together, they were promoting their electricity and they got a line going through. There was, all kinds of activity. And it was just sort of a model for much of the nation in terms of what kind of a community it was. And over the years, to make a long story short, over the years that community changed as it became one of those redlined districts where only certain communities could live. Black people could only live there or other parts of the city. And even when Black people did well in that neighborhood, at some point, like so many communities, as the other parts of the city expand or receive federal support, that community didn't necessarily receive that support. And instead, as they built their freeways and things, they cut up the neighborhood and they broke the neighborhoods apart. And so the neighborhood suffered and became, it was a bit dejected for a while and was, considered a quote unquote bad neighborhood, and the property values were down and all that kind of stuff. But it was still, by this point, almost exclusively a Black neighborhood, minority populated neighborhood. And flashing forward, now here we are in a place where, again, like much of the nation, people who have cash have come in and started to try and buy up a lot of property. So now, whereas only 10 years ago there might be a $30,000 home, there are now $500,000 townhomes in that area. And so the city is very, very rich with its history. Black Panthers living there, working there, businesses and famous acts came through town, famous jazz stars performing at the Guild Theater there in town. It's known for its great, great, great history, beautiful homes, and even now there's a wonderful walk you can take through the neighborhood to see some of the historic places and buildings. So I don't know that this is particularly unique to the nation. I think there are many stories like this around the nation where you find these incredible neighborhoods where Black communities were just kind of, your story's not a main story, so we're just gonna move that out of the way. And so we forget a lot of these wonderful possibilities of neighborhoods as they get purchased, bought up by other people. And so it's a bit contentious right now, some of that that's been going on. But it also is a hopeful place. There's a lot of reinvestment in the neighborhood from its current occupants and those who moved away a long time ago. They're coming back to trying to make sure that Oak Park still takes care of its residents who've been there for a long time and supported it in, through all of these changes, and not just those who came in with money to invest in it. So it's a touchy subject in some ways. But it was so ripe with ideas and things and history that we wanted to tackle, trying to tell that history in an interesting way, or at least touch on, at least expose elements of the history to the community.
And help people talk about it as well.
Yeah, right.
History is something I've gradually learned, like other people, myself about. I mean, honestly, as a kid myself, I knew it as not a good neighborhood. That's how I knew it. Mm-hmm. And then I learned more that it has this rich history. And then I went to see your, production and learn even more about that. I think I may have cut the last one, which is like 80s, maybe 1980s to now.
Yeah.
could you talk about some of the different elements? It's like it was kind of like part documentary and part musical performance. There were some people doing poetry. Maybe you could give us like a sampling of the various kind of
So,
elements that made up those performances.
so what we tried to do was to get, in order to sort of, what you're talking about, the show that you saw and the series that you're talking about is really, the whole thing was called Convergence 2. Because the year before, or 2 years before really, we did Convergence 1, which was just what was the same concept, but we just tried to do one event. We were like, okay, we're doing Convergence and we're gonna talk about the history, and we had a dance group, and we had some video with some interviews and things and some music, um, and we thought that this is too small to tell this big story, this great history. So instead, let's see if we can split it up. And we got a creative edge grant, creative edge grant from the city to do that. So we worked with some filmmakers to create documentaries, about 15-minute, maybe 10 to 15-minute documentaries, where we went and interviewed people from the community, had them talking to us about, we had historians, we had teachers, residents of the community, talking about different aspects, particularly in phases. So we did the very beginning part, a third of the century, the middle, and then the end, up to now. And so when we did the documentary, we presented the documentary in 3 live events. We presented the documentary film, and then we did some live music and dance with each of those events to help bring it to life, excuse me, even more. So that's essentially the format that it took. You know, we had the film, we had musicians, we had dancers, and I sang and arranged the music and things like that. I just wanted to bring people in to facilitate dialogue in a creative way, not just here's a PowerPoint and talk.
It's a lot more fun than just like if I see, oh, documentary on this neighborhood showing, honestly, yeah. Versus Mode Trio with
we literally had a choir stand up and sing a giant spiritual in the middle of one of our performances. You know, we had the film go, and then we did some stuff. We had a spoken word poet and did this, and all of a sudden a choir stood up in the middle of the audience and sang and blew the roof off the place. Sat down, we did some more stuff, whatever, and then we left. We had a conversation, and it was and you know, not everybody liked everything we did. Not everybody likes to talk about the history unless they get their point of view told. When it's touchy, right?
So what kind of responses did you have? I mean, I imagine you had people liked it, people didn't like it. Like, what was the response like from the community?
Well, it was a combination of those things. It was some people who said, I really appreciate you talking about this history because I didn't know. And that's really all we did it for, right? Because we didn't know. We were learning about the whole Joyland amusement park that was there that, you know, there are no remnants of, hardly. And all this wonderful, incredible history from almost 100 years ago, right? And then moving into the very difficult times where there were, you know, we had one of the Black Panthers who had been here when there were riots and things, and he spoke, and you know, we talked about the history of that, and people were like, I didn't know that there was a riot in Oak Park, and I didn't know, you know, and I didn't know that there was no freeway here. And so the response was, you know, a mixture of that. We did have some who said, you know, in our contemporary times, we tend to think that, well, they didn't think that we took enough of a side in the final sort of episode about, you know, where the city's going. And we were very clear amongst ourselves what we thought. And, but we also wanted to make sure that people, I mean, I don't like to tell people, this is what you should think.
Yeah. I mean,
that's not my job.
They can see what happened for themselves.
Right.
In a way.
And I think that if you look close enough, you do know what I think, but I'm not explicitly putting that out there. I mean, that's not art. That's not interesting to me. It's all on its face like that. That I wouldn't want that. So at any rate, it wasn't a commercial. It was a display of some information, and so those were the kinds of responses that we got, and I like that. I like that it was a range of things. It wasn't just one thing, because that means that either people are moved to act, or they, or at least moved, changed because they've been given some new information. At the very least, they've gained in perspective.
Yeah, and I think, refraining from putting, your own explicit stamp on something, which, I mean, of course we all have opinions, but like, if I have an opinion now, I can go on Facebook or whatever and rant about it. Like, and I mean, I don't really like to do that, but art offers so much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we started, I think, the third episode with, like, I say episode, the third live event. I think we started with, was it America the Beautiful? But it was like twisted. There was something wrong with it. It wasn't quite beautiful. That, I think that kind of gives you an idea of where we're going with this. And that we think there's something a little off about what's happening. And that certainly was true of a lot of residents that we spoke with and that were in the videos. There were some amens and claps that happened when they heard people speaking from their experience. And I think that's what it's about. I think that's what it's got to be about.
Yeah, I totally agree. Is there anything else that I haven't gotten to that you want to say before I let you go?
No, I don't think so. Thank you so much for just letting me chat with you. This format is kind of, I think, the new thing for so many people. People are doing this all over, and it's really important that we keep the dialogue going, because normally this would happen at a cafe or a party or at an event, but we don't have that now. So it's really important that you do this, and in the absence of our physical, natural world, there's nature.
The Zoom purgatory. Yeah,
we're trapped. Yeah. No, I appreciate you for offering this. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really happy for this excuse to talk with you also, and someday we'll have a coffee or something in a future time.
With our masks, we will do that.
With our masks and sipping it like that.
You got it.
All right. Thanks so much, Omari.
Absolutely. Take care.